Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his transport ship and watched the blue planet grow larger in the darkness of space. New Haven looked beautiful from orbit with its oceans shining under the light of a young sun. After 6 months of traveling through space, the sight made his heart beat faster with excitement. Lieutenant Amy Crawford walked up beside him and smiled at the view. She had been counting the days until they reached the colony world. 3,000 people lived down there building new lives on a world that felt almost like Earth. The colony had grown from a few metal buildings to a real town with farms and schools and even a small spaceport. New Haven represented everything humanity hoped to achieve as they pushed deeper into unexplored space. Jake's ship carried supplies and equipment and 50 new colonists who wanted to start fresh lives on the frontier. Among them was Dr. Lisa Bennett, who had spent years studying the plants and animals of New Haven. Her research suggested this world might be the most Earth-like ecosystem ever discovered by humans. As they moved closer to the planet, Jake reviewed his mission orders again. This was supposed to be a simple supply run. Drop off cargo and passengers, then pick up some samples and head back to Earth. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous, just another routine mission. The communication system beeped and a voice came through from the bridge. Ensign Kyle Rogers reported that they were receiving standard signals from New Haven Control. Everything seemed normal. The colony was confirming their approach and welcoming them. Jake told Kyle to take them in for landing, but something felt wrong. He could not explain what bothered him at first. The transmission had been correct, but there was something strange in the background noise, a faint distortion that did not sound like normal interference. Amy frowned and played the audio again. Maybe it was solar activity, she suggested. New Haven's star had been known to cause communication problems before. Then the console erupted with terrible sounds. Not a normal transmission, but screaming. A voice cried out for help, saying they were everywhere and oh God, they were attacking. The voice cut off suddenly and was replaced by static and something else, a sound like nothing Jake had ever heard before. It was clicking and chittering, almost mechanical in its rhythm. Jake ran toward the bridge with Amy right behind him. He shouted for battle stations and demanded a visual on the colony immediately. The main screen flickered to life and Jake felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. New Haven was burning. Massive ships hung in orbit above the planet. Their shapes were unlike anything in the human database. They looked organic somehow, with armor plating that seemed to shift and move like living tissue. Beams of terrible purple energy lanced down from the ships, carving deep wounds across the surface of the colony world. Where the beams struck, nothing remained but glowing craters of molten rock. Kyle's voice cracked as he reported multiple alien vessels. He counted 20, then 30, then lost count. They were everywhere, he said. The aliens filled the space around New Haven like a swarm of predators. Through the magnified view, Jake could see the colony itself. Buildings collapsed in flames. People ran through streets and were cut down by small fighter craft that swooped from the sky. The alien ships moved with deadly grace-hunting survivors with cold precision. Jake ordered Kyle to open all channels and broadcast on every frequency. He wanted to tell the aliens that they were human and meant no harm. Maybe this was all a terrible mistake. Maybe they could talk and end this nightmare. But an alien fighter detached from the swarm and accelerated directly toward Jake's ship. Amy shouted for evasive maneuvers, and Kyle threw the ship into a desperate roll. The alien fighter was faster than anything they had ever seen. Purple energy splashed across their hull and alarms screamed throughout the ship. Someone yelled that they had a hull breach on Deck 3, but the emergency force fields were holding. Jake commanded them to return fire, even though he knew it was hopeless. Their ship was a cargo hauler with only 2 small defense cannons meant for shooting asteroids, not fighting in combat. The weapons spat streams of metal rounds, and by pure luck, one volley caught the alien fighter's wing. The craft spun wildly and exploded in a brief flash of blue flame. But 20 more fighters broke formation and came for them. Amy gripped Jake's shoulder and said quietly that they could not fight them all. They needed to jump away immediately. Jake stared at the screen showing the people dying below. Every instinct screamed at him to help, to do something. But his ship carried 50 civilians in the cargo hold. Staying here meant death for everyone on board. He ordered Kyle to calculate jump coordinates and get them to the nearest human outpost. He also told them to send a priority distress signal with everything they had recorded, full data packet, all the footage and sensor readings. As the alien fighters closed in, the ship's quantum drive began to spin up with a high-pitched whine. Space twisted and impossible. Ways and light bent around them as reality prepared to tear open. They jumped, leaving New Haven and its 3,000 souls to their terrible fate. The last image Jake saw before the jump completed was a little girl, no more than 7 years old, looking up at the sky with her arms outstretched toward the ships above. Then purple fire consumed her small body and she was gone, forever. The message they transmitted would take 3 weeks to reach Earth, traveling at faster than light speeds through the quantum network. When it arrived, everything would change for humanity. Jake sat in his captain's chair staring at the empty screen long after they emerged from the jump. Amy stood beside him in silence. Neither of them spoke. What words could capture what they had just witnessed? What language could express the horror of watching an entire colony full of families and children exterminated like insects? In the cargo hold, the 50 colonists, who had been so excited to start new lives on New Haven, sat in shocked silence. Their dreams of frontier homesteads and fresh starts had died with the colony. Now they were just refugees fleeing from an enemy they did not understand. Dr. Lisa Bennett sat alone in her quarters, surrounded by her research on New Haven's ecosystem. All her years of work studying that beautiful world now meant nothing. The plants and animals she had cataloged so carefully were probably burning like everything else. The ship limped toward the nearest human outpost, a small mining station called Outpost 7. It would take them 2 days to get there. 2 days of silence and grief and growing rage. Jake knew that when word reached Earth, there would be calls for action. Politicians would demand responses. Military leaders would calculate odds and strategies. The entire human civilization would have to decide how to answer this unprovoked attack. But sitting there in his captain's chair, watching the stars streak past, Jake already knew what the answer would be. Humanity would go to war. Admiral Patricia Hayes sat in the emergency meeting room watching the footage from New Haven for the 5th time. The recording from Jake Morrison's ship played on the massive screen, and with each viewing, the rage in the room grew stronger and more intense. 3,000 dead. An entire colony wiped out in less than 4 hours. Men and women and children, slaughtered without warning, without provocation, without any mercy at all. Secretary General Richard Cole commanded them to pause the image. The screen froze on a frame showing the alien vessels in detail. The ships were massive, much larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their design looked wrong somehow, with angles that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly, surfaces that appeared to be both technological and biological at the same time. Patricia asked if anyone had identified the species yet. Commander Frank Martinez, who was head of Xena Relations, stood up and activated his tablet. He said they had designated them the Kresh. They had found 3 brief references in data purchased from galactic trading posts over the past decade. All of them were warnings. Cole demanded to know what the warnings said. Frank explained that the Kresh were conquerors and expansionists. They moved through space like locusts, taking what they wanted and exterminating anyone who stood in their path. Based on fragmentary data, they controlled approximately 200 star systems in the western part of the galaxy. They had been pushing into this sector for the last 30 years. Patricia's voice could have cut through steel when she asked why nobody thought to warn humanity about this threat. Frank said that humans were newcomers to the galactic community. To the established powers, humanity barely registered as important. Humans controlled 6 systems while the Kresh controlled 200. To the galaxy's older civilizations, humanity was essentially irrelevant. Silence filled the chamber for a long moment. Then Cole spoke with each word measured and cold as ice. He said that humanity would make themselves relevant now. Patricia leaned forward and reminded him that Earth's fleet was not prepared for a war of this scale. Their ships were designed for system defense and exploration, not major combat operations. The Kresh outgunned humanity by 100 to 1. Cole said he was aware of their limitations. He was also aware that 3,000 of their people were dead, and more would die if humanity did nothing. He said they had spent the last 50 years building their presence in space, building colonies and establishing trade and making peace with species that would talk to them. Humanity had been good galactic citizens. He stood up, and the weight of humanity's rage seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. He asked what being good citizens had gotten them. Their people were murdered while they smiled and asked nicely for a seat at the diplomatic table. He said no more. He looked directly at Patricia and told her she was authorized to mobilize the entire Terran defense fleet. Every ship, every crew, every weapon they possessed. Patricia pointed out that this would leave Earth and the inner colonies virtually undefended. Cole said that the Kresh would learn what humans do when you back them into a corner, when you take everything from them, when you make them choose between death and fighting back. He said the aliens would learn that humanity does not have a reverse gear. The vote was unanimous among the council members. Within 72 hours, the mobilization began across all human space. Captain Greg Palmer watched from the bridge of his heavy cruiser Vengeance as ship after ship broke orbit from the lunar shipyards. Cruisers and destroyers and carriers and even the older frigate-class vessels that had been scheduled for retirement. Every hull that could mount a weapon and survive a quantum jump was being pressed into service. His executive officer, Commander Natalie Ford, said quietly that it was not enough. Even with everything they had, the Kresh would overwhelm humanity with superior numbers. Greg did not disagree with her assessment. The Terran fleet consisted of 37 capital ships and perhaps 300 smaller craft. Against an empire that controlled 200 star systems, it was like David versus Goliath, except David had a sling and all humanity had were what amounted to pop guns. Greg replied that they would have to be smarter then, faster and more brutal than the Kresh expected them to be. Natalie reported that they were receiving tactical briefs from Strategic Command. The military was implementing something called Protocol Ragnarok. Greg accessed the file on his console and felt his blood run cold as he read. Protocol Ragnarok was not a battle plan in the traditional sense. It was a philosophy. It stated that humanity facing extinction would not go quietly into the darkness, that every loss would be paid back tenfold, that mercy was a luxury reserved for those who showed it first. The protocol outlined tactics that pushed the edges of galactic warfare conventions. Weapons that targeted enemy logistics and supply lines, strikes against civilian infrastructure, scorched earth policies that would render conquered worlds completely useless. It was brutal and merciless. It was total war with no limits and no apologies. Greg realized something as he read through the document. They were not being asked to win this conflict. They were being asked to make the Kresh regret ever attacking humanity in the first place. Natalie asked if there was a difference between those two goals. Greg closed the file and said maybe not to humans. But to the galaxy watching this unfold, there was a difference. Humanity was about to teach everyone what happens when you make desperate people fight for their survival. The fleet assembled at Rally Point Sigma, which was a dark region between stars chosen for its strategic location. As each ship arrived, it took its position in the growing formation. The sight was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. 37 capital ships representing the full military might of humanity. Admiral Patricia Hayes transmitted a message from her flagship, the carrier Indomitable. She told all ships that by now they had received their mission briefings. They knew what the Kresh did to New Haven. They knew that humanity was outmatched and outgunned. They knew that many of them would not be coming home from this war. She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the full weight of humanity's grief and fury. She said that the Kresh did not know something important. They did not know that humans had been fighting since they lived in caves, that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them completely. They did not know that humans had always been too stubborn to admit when they were beaten. The Kresh wiped out one human colony and thought humanity would roll over, accept their place in the galaxy, beg for mercy and submit. Patricia said the aliens were about to learn they were wrong. Humanity was going to hit them so hard that every species in the galaxy would hear about it. Humanity was going to make them pay for every single life they took, and when it was done, the Kresh would remember the name Terra with fear. She told all ships to prepare for quantum jump. Their target was a Kresh forward staging area in a system designated Theta 9. The rules of engagement were simple. If it was Kresh, kill it. If it helped the Kresh, destroy it. Show them the cost of making Earth bleed. Patricia counted down from 3 to 1 and gave the order to jump. Space tore open in 37 places simultaneously. Humanity went to war. The Kresh staging area at Theta 9 was a massive military installation, orbiting a frozen dead world. Supply depots and repair facilities and troop carriers clustered around a huge command station that served as the regional headquarters for Kresh operations. In this part of space, when the human Fleet emerged from their quantum jumps. The aliens had 60 seconds of warning before the first missiles arrived. Commander Greg Palmer's ship, Vengeance, led the assault wing with its launch bays releasing a swarm of autonomous attack drones. Behind them came the heavy ships with their main guns already charging up for battle. Greg commanded all batteries to fire freely. He ordered his crew to target the command station first, then move on to supply vessels. He wanted nothing left intact when they were finished here. The Vengeance's main railgun fired with a sound like thunder rolling through the ship. The tungsten ceramic slug accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and crossed the distance in heartbeats. It struck the command station's central hub with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The structure did not explode in the traditional sense. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized completely by the kinetic impact. Around them, the rest of the fleet engaged the enemy. The carrier Indomitable launched wave after wave of fighters piloted by men and women who had been flying simulators a month ago and were now facing real combat for the first time. The destroyers Righteous Fury and Last Word bracketed a Kresh supply convoy with their weapons and turned the transport ships into expanding clouds of debris and frozen atmosphere, but the Kresh were not defenseless against this attack. Their defense platforms swiveled to track the human ships and unleashed storms of purple energy. The frigate Defiant took a direct hit and broke apart like a toy. Its fusion core breached in a brief, brilliant flash. 43 souls gone in an instant with no time to even scream. Greg ordered evasive pattern Delta as enemy fire bracketed the Vengeance on all sides. He told his crew to return fire with point defense systems and keep those fighters away from their hull. On the bridge's tactical display, Lieutenant Sam Webster coordinated the drone swarms. The small craft were expendable, with each one guided by advanced artificial intelligence and packed with explosives. They swarmed over Kresh vessels like angry hornets, targeting weapons emplacements and engine clusters with precision strikes. Sam reported a direct hit on target Beta. The enemy destroyer was listing badly and venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. Greg ordered coldly to finish the damaged ship. A spread of missiles lanced out from the Vengeance, with each one adjusting its trajectory with impossible precision. They struck the crippled Kresh destroyer in sequence, punching through the weakened armor and detonating deep inside the hull. The ship came apart in sections, spilling alien bodies into the cold vacuum of space. But for every Kresh vessel they destroyed, more seemed to appear from the staging area. The facility had housed nearly 80 ships, and now they were all launching, all converging on the human fleet, with murderous intent. Admiral Hayes transmitted to all ships that Phase 1 was complete. She ordered all vessels to execute Protocol Ragnarok Section 3 immediately. Greg pulled up the protocol on his console and felt his stomach clench with what he read there. Section 3 dealt with force multiplication through unconventional means that pushed ethical boundaries. He ordered his weapons officer quietly to arm the civilian packages. Natalie Ford turned to look at him with her face pale. She started to protest, but Greg cut her off. He said he knew what they were and told her to arm them anyway. The civilian packages were one of humanity's dirtiest secrets in this war. When it became clear that humans could not match Kresh firepower through conventional means, someone in Strategic Command had proposed a dark solution. Take decommissioned civilian vessels and pack them with fusion warheads and artificial intelligence pilots. Send them on one-way missions disguised as debris or disabled craft until they got close enough to detonate. Suicide ships, weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. 3 such vessels had been hidden among the fleet's logistics train. Now they activated with their engines cold starting as they drifted toward concentrations of Kresh vessels. Admiral Hayes ordered all ships to pull back to Rally Point Bravo. She told them to clear the engagement zone immediately. The human fleet broke contact with their quantum drives, spinning up even as Kresh weapons hammered their retreating shields. The aliens gave chase, eager to press what they thought was their advantage. They never saw the trap coming. The first civilian package, which had been a mining hauler named Hope's End, drifted into the middle of a Kresh carrier group. Its artificial intelligence core waited until it detected maximum enemy density. Then it triggered its payload. 3 fusion warheads, each in the megaton range, detonated simultaneously. The explosion lit up the Theta 9 system like a newborn star. 4 Kresh carriers and 24 support craft simply vanished, consumed utterly by nuclear fire. The shockwave caught 3 more ships and crushed them like paper in a giant's fist. The second and third packages detonated. within seconds of each other, catching the Kresh fleet as it tried desperately to scatter. By the time the light faded, the staging area was gone. 78 enemy vessels had been reduced to wreckage and radiation, but the victory came at a terrible price for humanity. 7 human ships had been destroyed in the engagement. 4 more were crippled beyond repair with their crews dead or dying in the wreckage. Nearly 1,000 people gone in an engagement that lasted less than 30 minutes. On the bridge of the indomitable Admiral Patricia Hayes stared at the casualty reports scrolling across her screen. She felt nothing but cold determination as she read the names of the dead. She ordered her communications officer to transmit the tactical data to all Kresh-controlled systems within transmission range. She told them to let the aliens see what happened here. Let them know what was coming for them. Her tactical officer protested that this would reveal human capabilities to the enemy. Patricia replied that this was good. She wanted the Kresh to be afraid. She wanted them to see what happens when you attack Earth. She wanted every Kresh commander to look at these images and ask themselves if their mission was worth dying, for the message went out on every frequency broadcast in every language humanity had encountered in their exploration of space. It showed the battle from multiple angles, showed the destruction of the staging area, showed what a species pushed to the edge of extinction could accomplish when they had nothing left to lose. But the message also included footage from New Haven, the burning colony, the dead children lying in the streets, the systematic extermination of 3,000 innocent people who had never done anything to deserve such a fate. And it ended with a simple message, transmitted in clear text that every species could understand. This was for New Haven. Humanity was just getting started. The message rippled out across the stars, carried by quantum transmitters and relay stations. Within days, every major civilization in the galaxy would see what happened at Theta 9. They would see that humanity, when cornered, did not beg for mercy. They fought back with everything they had, and they made you pay in blood for every human life you took. The Council of Aligned Worlds met in emergency session aboard the massive orbital station called Concordia. This diplomatic platform served as neutral ground for the galaxy's major powers. Representatives from 43 different species gathered in the central chamber with their various forms, arranged in a complex amphitheater designed to accommodate wildly different physiologies. Ambassador Helen Price represented humanity, and she stood alone at the speaker's podium while 1,000 alien eyes regarded her with expressions ranging from contempt to fear. The Zithani delegate, who was a crystalline being, spoke first. Its voice sounded like breaking glass and chimed through the translation system. It said the Council must address the actions of the human species. Their attack on the Kresh staging facility at Theta 9 violated 17 provisions of the Galactic Warfare Accords. They used weapons of mass destruction. They targeted civilian support vessels. They broadcast propaganda in violation of standard diplomatic protocols. Helen waited for the translation to finish before she replied with icy calm. She said the Galactic Warfare Accords existed to protect civilian populations during military conflicts. The Kresh exterminated 3,000 human civilians, including children, without warning or provocation. She asked where these precious accords were when New Haven burned. Another delegate pointed out that the Kresh were not signatories to the accords. This one was a methane-breathing Vren in an environmental suit. It said that Kresh actions, while regrettable, did not fall under the Council's jurisdiction. Helen said how convenient that was. The Kresh could slaughter innocent people, but when humans fought back suddenly there were rules that must be followed. She asked the Vren ambassador how many of their colonies the Kresh had destroyed. How many Vren children had been vaporized by purple fire? The Vren delegate did not answer her question. Helen said that was what she thought. She pulled up a holographic display showing the attack on New Haven. The assembly watched in silence as human beings died over and over again on the screen. She said humanity tried to be good galactic citizens. They followed the rules. They asked politely for trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. They smiled while the galaxy treated them like primitive newcomers barely worth acknowledging. And when humanity was attacked and their people were murdered, the galaxy did nothing. They were doing nothing now except criticizing humans for daring to defend themselves. The crystalline delegate chimed urgently. It said humanity was provoking a war that would consume this entire sector of space. The Kresh were too powerful to fight directly. Human actions would only ensure their extinction and endanger every species near human space. Helen said simply, "Then help us." Humanity was not asking the Council to fight their battles. They were asking for intelligence about enemy movements, supply lines and logistics information, medical support for the wounded, the things you would provide to any species facing genocide. The Vren delegate said that was impossible. The Kresh would consider such aid an act of war. The Council could not risk their own survival. Helen finished the sentence for him. She said she understood. The Council would rather watch humanity die than risk angering the Kresh. At least they were honest about their cowardice. The chamber erupted in outrage at her words. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, and their translation devices created a cacophony of indignation. But Helen just smiled coldly at all of them. She said they wanted to know what humanity would do next. She would tell them. Humans were going to fight with everything they had. They were going to hit the Kresh so hard that the aliens would choke on human blood. And when humanity went down, because they would eventually go down, they were going to make sure the entire galaxy remembered what it cost to ignore Earth's screams for help. She pulled up another display showing the destroyed Kresh staging area at Theta 9. She said this was just the beginning. Every Kresh asset in human space was now a target. Every supply line, every forward base, every ship they could reach. Humanity would burn through their entire fleet if they had to, and when their ships were gone, they would use civilian vessels. When those were destroyed, they would hijack Kresh ships and ram them into each other. The crystalline delegate said Helen was describing total war. Helen corrected it. She said she was describing survival. The Kresh made this total war when they killed human children. Humanity was just playing by the rules the aliens had established. She deactivated the display and looked directly at each delegate in turn. She said the Council was going to watch humans fight. Watch them die. Watch them take as many Kresh with them as possible. And then when the Kresh turned their attention to other worlds, the Council would remember this moment. Remember that they could have stopped this. That they could have shown the galaxy that civilized species protect each other. Instead, the Council chose fear. And fear was exactly what the Kresh fed on, so they should enjoy their safety while it lasted. Because once the Kresh were done with humanity, they would remember how easily the Council abandoned their principles. And they would come for the Council's worlds next. Helen walked out of the chamber without waiting for dismissal. Behind her, the Council descended into chaos and angry arguments. But her words had struck home with some delegates. Within a week, intelligence packets began arriving at human outposts. Anonymous transmissions containing Kresh fleet movements and supply routes and strategic assessments. Never anything that could be traced back to the sender, but enough information to make a real difference in the war. The galaxy was watching the conflict now. And some species, at least, were starting to hope that the crazy humans might just pull off the, impossible. On the bridge of the indomitable Admiral Hayes reviewed the new intelligence with grim satisfaction. Commander Vincent Shaw, her chief of staff, observed that Helen had rattled some cages. They were getting data dumps from at least a dozen different species. Nothing official, but helpful nonetheless. Patricia said it was enough to plan their next move. She pulled up a star chart showing Kresh-controlled space. The intelligence confirmed what they suspected. The Kresh were overextended. They had been pushing their expansion too quickly, and their supply lines were stretched dangerously thin. Vincent said they should cut those supply lines. Patricia agreed. Humanity could not match Kresh numbers in a fair fight, but they could starve the enemy, target their fuel depots and manufacturing facilities and supply convoys, make every ship they lost irreplaceable. She highlighted a system deep in Kresh territory. This was their primary refueling station for this sector. Take it out and every ship within 10 jumps would be stranded without fuel. Vincent pointed out that the target was 70 light-years into enemy space. They would be completely unsupported. If things went wrong, there would be no rescue. Patricia met his eyes and said if things went wrong, they would die. Just like if they did nothing, they would die anyway. But maybe, just maybe, they would die doing enough damage that the Kresh would think twice before hitting another human world. Vincent nodded slowly and asked when they would leave. Patricia told him to assemble a strike force. She wanted fast ships with long-range capability, cruisers and destroyers, only nothing that could not outrun trouble if they had to retreat. They would jump in 48 hours. As Vincent left to carry out her orders, Patricia looked at the casualty reports from Theta 9 again. 1,000 dead, and it was only the beginning of this war. But the alternative was extinction, and humanity had never been good at accepting extinction quietly. The strike force emerged from quantum space near the Kresh refueling station at 4 in the morning ship time. 16 vessels faced a facility that could service 100 ships simultaneously and was protected by a permanent defense fleet of 30 Kresh warships. The odds were terrible, and the mission was nearly suicidal. Admiral Hayes would not have sent anyone else. She transmitted to all ships that weapons were free. She reminded them they were not here to win in the traditional sense. They were here to make the Kresh bleed for what they did to New Haven. The Indomitable and its escorts accelerated toward the station at maximum burn with their weapons already tracking targets. The Kresh response was immediate. Alarms blared across their fleet and vessels began emergency launch procedures to counter the human attack. But the humans had learned from the battle at Theta 9. They had studied every second of footage and analyzed every weapon signature. They had identified every weakness in Kresh tactics and technology. Captain Greg Palmer's Vengeance led a flight of 4 destroyers straight at the station's primary dock. Behind them came a formation of missile boats, which were small craft designed around a single purpose: delivering devastating strikes and then dying. Greg announced to the missile boats that they were weapons-free in 30 seconds. He told them to make every shot count because this was their only chance. The Kresh defense platforms opened fire, and their purple energy beams lanced through the darkness of space. The destroyer Resolute twisted desperately but took a glancing hit that peeled away a third of its armor plating. The ship kept coming with its crew fighting to maintain course even as atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches in the hull. Greg counted down the seconds. 15, then 10, then 5. He gave the order to launch. 40 missile boats fired simultaneously, with each one emptying its entire payload in a single massive volley. Hundreds of missiles streaked toward the refueling station, with their drives burning at maximum power. The Kresh point defense systems engaged immediately and filled space with intersecting fields of fire. Missiles exploded by the dozen, creating a wall of expanding debris and deadly energy. But you could not stop them all. 23. Missiles punched through the defensive screen and slammed into the station's fuel storage tanks. The tanks each contained enough antimatter fuel to power an entire fleet. They breached simultaneously in a catastrophic failure. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The refueling station did not just explode. It ceased to exist on a molecular level, converted to pure energy, in a blast that consumed everything within 1,000 kilometers. 13 Kresh ships vanished instantly. The shockwave crippled 8 more vessels beyond any hope of repair. But the shockwave did not discriminate between friend and enemy. The missile boats with their drives already burned out from the full-power launch had no way to escape. All 40 craft were caught in the expanding sphere of destruction, 400 human lives gone in an instant. They had known it was a one-way trip. They had volunteered anyway. Admiral Hayes ordered all ships to fall back even as her own vessel shook from the concussive wave. She told them to execute scatter pattern Omega and not let the Kresh regroup for a counterattack. The surviving human vessels split into 4 groups, with each one racing away on a different vector. The Kresh gave chase, but their coordination was shattered. Their command structure had been based on the now vaporized station, and the remaining ships struggled to coordinate their response effectively. It gave the humans just enough time to jump to safety. 11 ships made it out alive. 5 did not, with their quantum drives too damaged or their crews too injured to complete the jump sequence. They died buying time for their comrades to escape and took as many Kresh with them as they could. The Indomitable emerged at the rally point 12 hours later, with its hull scorched and scarred from battle. As Patricia Hayes surveyed the damage report, she felt the weight of every loss. Like a physical burden on her shoulders. She asked Vincent quietly for the final count. He reported 947 confirmed dead, 312 wounded. They lost 5 capital ships and all 40 missile boats, but they destroyed the refueling station and 31 enemy vessels. Strategic analysis estimated they had cut Kresh operational capacity in this sector by 40%. Patricia nodded with her expression unreadable. She asked what it would cost the Kresh to replace those losses. Vincent said months, maybe years. That station was a major logistical hub. Without it, the Kresh would have to pull back to consolidate their forces, redeploy assets from other sectors. It bought humanity time. Patricia repeated the word bitterly. Time purchased with the lives of 900 people. Vincent said gently that they knew what they were signing up for. They wanted to make their deaths count for something. Over the next 3 months, the pattern repeated across multiple star systems. Human strike forces, increasingly desperate and increasingly effective, struck deep into Kresh territory. They hit supply convoys and manufacturing centers and communications relays. They could not win battles of attrition, so they did not fight them. Instead, they focused on making every Kresh victory cost more than it was worth. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity facing extinction refused to die quietly. But the cost mounted terribly. 10,000 dead, then 20,000. The Terran fleet, which had started with 37 capital ships, was down to 19. Every engagement meant losses that could never be replaced. And then the Kresh changed their tactics. Instead of pursuing the human raiders, they struck at Earth itself. Captain Linda Foster was on patrol duty near Mars when the Kresh fleet emerged from quantum space. 200 ships. The largest concentration of alien military force ever seen in human space. They had bypassed all the forward defenses and used tactics stolen from captured human vessels. They jumped directly to Earth's doorstep. Admiral Hayes transmitted from her position near the moon. She told all ships this was not a drill. All available vessels were ordered to converge on Earth immediately, but there were not enough vessels. Most of the fleet was scattered across a dozen systems conducting raids or recovering from previous engagements. Only 8 ships stood between Earth and annihilation. Linda said quietly to her crew aboard the light cruiser Defiant Hope that they could not stop them all. There were too many. Her executive officer, Commander Paul Grant, replied that they would slow the Kresh down. Buy time for civilians to evacuate from the planet. Around Earth, evacuation transports began emergency launches. Millions of people crammed into ships designed for thousands. There was not time to save everyone. Would not be time even if they had hours instead of minutes. But they would save who they could. The 8 ships of Earth's final defense formed a line between the planet and the approaching Kresh armada. The Indomitable at the center, flanked by cruisers and destroyers that had survived more battles than anyone had a right to expect. Admiral Hayes transmitted to all ships. Her voice was calm, almost serene. She said they had fought across a dozen systems. They had made the Kresh pay for every inch of space they took. Today they fought for their home. They fought for every person on that planet who never asked for this war but refused to surrender. This was humanity's final stand. She told them to make it worthy of the name Terra. Show the Kresh what humans do when there is nowhere left to run. For Earth, for the colonies, for everyone they lost and everyone they were saving. She gave the order to engage. The 8 vessels accelerated toward 200. It was magnificent and terrible. The defiant charge of a species that refused to accept extinction. The Kresh opened fire. Linda watched as the Indomitable took a dozen hits in the first volley. The massive carrier's shields flared and failed. Purple fire began eating into its hull, but Admiral Hayes did not pull back. She could not. Behind her was Earth. The Defiant Hope launched every missile it had, then closed to railgun range. Linda's hands were steady on the controls as enemy fire bracketed her ship. She told Paul to reroute all power to forward shields. She was taking them into close-range combat. Paul protested that it was suicide. Linda replied they were already dead. They should make it expensive for the Kresh. The Defiant Hope dove into the heart of the Kresh formation with its railguns firing continuously. A Kresh destroyer took 3 hits and exploded. A cruiser lost its engines and began to drift helplessly. But there were always more enemies. Purple fire slashed across the Defiant Hope's hull, cutting deep into the superstructure. The bridge shook violently as systems failed one by one. Someone screamed that they had hull breaches on all decks and were venting atmosphere rapidly. Linda ordered them to keep firing. Do not stop until the ship was dead. A direct hit struck the bridge. Linda Foster never finished giving orders. All around Earth, the same scene played out 8 times. 8 ships against 200. They held for 23 minutes. 23 minutes purchased with the lives of 4,000 brave souls. And in those 23 minutes, 147 evacuation transports escaped Earth's gravity well and jumped to safety. Nearly 12 million people saved because 8 ships decided that some things were worth dying for, but Earth still felt Admiral Patricia Hayes dying. On the shattered bridge of the Indomitable, managed one final transmission. To Ambassador Helen Price, she said Earth was